Welcome to Auto Technic, and today I'm going to be sharing with you guys the techniques that I use to lower this 2008 Ferrari F430. Now, if you guys are new to the channel, you're definitely going to want to jump in the playlist and check out the other videos we have on this 430. We just finished converting it from an F1 car over to a true gated manual, and that project turned out great. Now, we do have a few loose ends to tidy up, but you can see that it's a true stick 3-pedal car now, and I am very excited to get it out on the road and get that first test drive done. But before I do, I still have a little bit of work left to do, and that's what we're here for today, which is going to be lowering this car. So you guys might be thinking that we're just going to be installing some lowering springs on this 430, but that's actually not the case. In this application specifically, and generally in most all Ferraris, they use a coilover setup. And depending on the application of the car, I would say probably 80%, 90% of the time, you're able to readjust the collars on the coilovers to drop your spring height down, which is going to enable you to lower the car without investing in any parts. Now, I say 80 to 90% because some of the cars that use the hydraulic front lifts, you're limited where there's not enough room to actually lower those cars. So it's definitely application specific. You have to kind of get under there and see if you have enough room to adjust everything and turn it down. In the case of this 430, there's ample space. We're going to be able to get it turned down, no problem. But here's the catch, guys. It's just not as black and white and straightforward as turning down the perches on the coilovers to get the car lowered. I say this because the cars actually, believe it or not, come from the factory not sitting level. So why don't the cars sit level from the factory? Well, that's because Ferrari gets these coilovers from a manufacturer and they're all pre-assembled. So the manufacturer is setting a dead set spring height on the coilover for the spring that is same left to right. Over the years, I've seen discrepancies of up to 15 millimeters on the ride height of these cars. And a lot of people kind of wonder why a car of this level, this prestige, and this quality comes with that much of an uneven ride height. And really, there's multiple factors that play into it. One of them is they have such a stiff chassis and stiff suspension that even a small adjustment on the collar on either side will have a big effect on the back of the car, like diagonally. So is what I'm referring to is let's use the left front for an example. If I make a small adjustment on the left front and change that ride height, I'll see a fairly moderate change back here on the rear, meaning even the smallest adjustments on the coilovers have a big effect on the ride height on more than one location on the car. Secondly, Ferrari is not assembling these coilovers on hand. They're getting them pre-assembled from the manufacturer that builds the shocks. So that manufacturer is going to set these coilovers up universally, meaning they're not going to set a different spring height for a left or right coilover. They're going to set them all at the same spring height, preset, send them to Ferrari. Ferrari's going to install them. And, you know, Ferrari's on their production line, they're not going to spend the time to adjust each coilover for each specific car. And there's things that will change depending if it's going on the left or right side of the car, the weight of the car, if it's a right-hand drive car, left-hand drive car. So it's not an ideal situation, and obviously we would all like to hear that the cars come from the factory perfectly level, but that's just not the reality of it. But I'm talking about this now because we're going to be lowering the car, but not only am I going to lower the car, I'm going to go through the work to actually correct the unevenness of the ride height and level this car out. I can't tell you guys how many cars I've lowered over the years, and I'll tell you that when I was working at the dealership, I would actually go through and lower the cars, and then I was the one doing the alignment after lowering the car. Now, I will tell you that if I just lower the car and did not correct the ride height, I always found it a bit unusual that the shims that were required to set my alignment where it needed to be, I found that it was uneven from side to side. And I just thought, why is this car needing uneven shims with the build quality of a Ferrari? They should be equal side to side to get my alignment where it needs to be. And these shims, mainly what we're talking about, are going to be set in our camber and caster. So my process evolved over the years where I kind of started to zone in and get a little bit more specific of what I was doing. And that's where I started kind of measuring the unevenness of the ride height before I'd start lowering the car. I would compensate for that unevenness as I lowered the car, make adjustments for it. And over the years, I found that the better I got the car sitting level, or the better I corrected the ride height and leveled the car out, my shims got way better on the alignment. If I could get it sitting dead level and dead perfect, once I got the car in the alignment rack, it needed the exact same shims side to side, and everything came out a lot better. The cars really came out with a much better alignment, which that kind of more aligned with what I was expecting from the build quality of these cars. So really, the true problem here is the actual coilover themselves, nothing to do with the chassis and the build quality of the car. It's just the assembly process of the car. So that's really my intentions with this video today. I want to walk you guys through the steps I take to lower the car, but really talk about the unevenness of the factory ride height, how we're going to correct it, and yes, it does make a difference on the alignment. All right, let's get started on this. So our first step is going to be taking some baseline measurements on the car. So we need to know where the car is sitting at now for ride height so we can measure the amount of drop we're going to give the car. But we also need to measure the car to see how uneven it is sitting right here, right now from the factory. Now I will say, anytime you raise the car and lower it, you're going to need to get the car off of the lift, roll it forward and backwards, jounce the suspension to give everything a chance to settle and neutralize so that way you can get accurate measurements. If you don't do that, you're going to be chasing your tail because the car will sit higher than it should be. And then once you get the car off, you're like, I've lowered it, it looks great. Then you move it and it's going to come down much further than you want. Now, we're going to talk about our lowering it here. I am not going to be aggressive. So we're not going to bring this car down 2 inches. We're not going to slam it. We're only aiming for like 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch max. So really is what the goal is here is just to minimize this gap. You can see that it's a pretty sizable gap here. We want to reduce that down. I definitely don't want to be tucking tire into the fender well and making this car very difficult for the client to drive around. He already does have aftermarket skid plates in the front bumper, which is a very good thing, and I definitely recommend those even if the car's not lowered, but definitely when the car is lowered. All right, so the first step that I'm going to do in this process is measure the actual ride height on all 4 corners. Now, when I'm measuring the ride height, I've seen people that measure from the center point of the hub up to the bottom edge of the fender liner. I don't like doing that method because that's not a dead set point. You have to kind of eyeball your tape measure to make sure you're at the center point, and then you have to eyeball your tape measure up here to make sure you're, get your reading where your fender is. And I will say that this edge is a nice smooth rolled edge. So it is difficult to see the exact reading. It takes a little bit of work. I'll show you guys in a little bit, but I have a kind of a way to work around that. But I like to pull my measurements with my tape measure down here at the bottom of the wheel, and then I kind of eyeball the tape measure. I'll show you guys. So I can hook the tape measure in the bottom of the wheel here. Need extra hand, like so. And then I can kind of eyeball the tape measure and make sure it goes through the center of the center cap. And then I can come up here and make my measurements. Once you get it hooked in the wheel, you can usually hold it. There you go. You can hold it tight. I'm struggling with only one hand, like that. And I'll take my measurements right there, and then I'll jot them down on a piece of paper. So that's really our initial steps, and do the process on all 4 corners. So I'm going to get that knocked out real quick and get everything documented on paper, bring you guys back, and we'll see how uneven this car is. $657. 641. 642. 643. Wow. All right. Go figure. That's Murphy's Law. 655. Go figure. Go figure. All right, so we got our initial ride heights documented, and it's a perfect example of Murphy's Law. Here I am talking about how these cars come uneven at ride height from the factory. I measure this car, and there's only a 2 millimeter deviation from side to side. This car is actually sitting incredibly level. Only natural for it to work out that way, where the first one I get in the shop, I go through the lower, is one of the best ones I've ever seen for the factory ride height. It is what it is, but anyways, we'll still run through this procedure for you guys. Here I have it documented. You can see I wrote it down right there. Everything is in millimeters. It's just easier for me to do it that way. And essentially, I have these documented to where this is the front of the car right here, the rear. So this is our left side. This is our right side. And you can see there's only a 1 millimeter deviation on the front and only 2 on the rear. Like I mentioned, that's highly unusual. It's Murphy's Law that happens on the first time I want to go through and film on the procedure to do this. But that's just the way it is. We're going to keep trucking forward and get this car lowered. Now, if you guys were watching on the video, it was taking me a little bit of time to decipher exactly where my ride height was because of the way the edge is rolled on the fender into the wheel well. It also doesn't help that this car is black. So there is a little workaround or trick for that, so that way our measurements are a lot quicker, a lot easier, and much more precise through this process. And that's what this tape that I talked about, where this 2-inch masking tape really comes into play. Is what I will do is I'm going to put a little piece of masking tape right up here under the fenders, and we're going to make an arbitrary line on that tape from the bottom of the wheel up to the tape. So I usually just kind of eyeball the line, depending once I get the tape on, what is a good solid easy number, and I will make that same mark all the way around on the car. And my point of that is just merely a point of reference, because if we're looking to lower this car, you know, 3/4 of an inch to an inch, so roughly 20-25 millimeters in that neighborhood, I just need to make that reference point, and then we're going to make the change on that mark. So I'm going to get my masking tape onto the car. I'm going to get those reference points set. I'll come back and show you in a little bit more detail what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's what we got going on. We have our masking tape on. You can see I've already made my arbitrary mark. And to establish that mark, we do our same technique. Get our tape measure on the bottom of the wheel. Get it positioned up here. Get it leveled right there. And you can see that we're right at 700 millimeters. Again, I just pick an easy arbitrary number. So since 700 was the starting point over there on the right rear, I come back and did the exact same thing up here, 700 millimeters. As for the front, bring it around, and we did 670 on the front. Again, on the left front, it's the exact same thing. So those numbers that we put on the masking tape, they're arbitrary. They're not actually measuring our ride height right now. It is just the same distance from the wheel to the fender, essentially as a measuring point for me as I go through and lower the car, just to make it easier so I don't have to try to eyeball that edge of that fender liner or the fender lip, and it just makes it quicker and easier to lower it. Now, in the end, when I'm making my final measurements, I will be measuring from the fender liner to make sure that it's level. But this gets me close, and it really saves a lot of time. It makes it a lot easier. So we got that taken care of. Now that we have our baseline ride height of the car, we have our reference points put onto the car. Our next step is to get the car up in the air, get the wheels off, and let's start talking about the coilovers. All right, so with the wheels off, we have a great view of our coilovers here. And for reference, we're over here on the left rear side of the car. And you can see that we just need to turn down our locking ring and our main spring perch ring here. Just lower them down. You can see we have ample space to lower them, and that's all we need to do to lower the car. Now, there's a couple of talking points here. It seems very tempting to just get in here and turn these collars down. And I can tell you that doing so with the coilover on the car, depending on the car, I've been able to get them turned down, but there's a couple of problems. One, grab my light again. To get in there and to use a traditional coilover wrench to get in there, you actually don't have that much space to actually get that wrench on. And this is a H&R one that I have that I've actually modified and had the file down to try to fit those rings. And I'll tell you that it does not fit very well. And from past experience, it ends up being more work than it should. So one of the main problems is there's so much pressure on the spring pushing down on the perch that it takes a lot of resistance to actually spin the spring perch. So even with it in the car, if you get everything broken free, you have enough room for the tool, it's very difficult. I've gone as far in the past as taking external spring compressors and trying compressing the spring on either side, and then it gets tight. You're trying to get your spring compressors in there to take the pressure off the perches. You're working around the spring compressors, you're working around the control arms, the axle of the car, and you're tooling. And I can tell you that I just ended up giving up on that. I see some people really fight through it and try to do it because they think it's just faster. In the end, it is not faster in my opinion, and you end up chewing up the spring collars, which I have a strong distaste for. We actually had a 355 here in the shop not too long ago, and that car was the worst I've ever seen on the spring collars, on how bad they were destroyed. And I mean, it baffles me that some people are so hackish on a Ferrari. I do not get it. I mean, I don't get it on any car, but if you're gonna hack a car up, go grab a Honda or Toyota, or go grab something else. I don't get it why you do it on these cars. So you can see It's tempting, right? But we're not going to do that. We're actually going to go through the work to remove the coilover. I found that the work to get the coilovers removed from the cars is actually far less than it is just the deal with the frustration and hassle of everything. Plus, you have this that's been there since 2008 that hasn't moved, so things aren't going to want to move that easily. You have grime on the threads that make it a little bit more difficult. It just overall is not worth it. I, every single time, take the coilovers out. Now, in this particular car, if we jump you in here, I don't know if you guys have already seen it, but I'll point it out. You can see that the rubber is really deteriorating on this lower spring pad. So fortunately, I actually had this car in here about a month ago, maybe it's a little bit more than a month ago, doing a post-purchase inspection for the client because the car is new to him. So I've already spotted that and evaluated it, and I gave him a heads up that they're deteriorating. It's not a critical item that we have to replace now, but you should keep it in mind. Fast forward now, we're doing the manual conversion on the car. He hits me up halfway through the project and says, hey, we talked about lowering the car, let's go through and lower the car. I said, perfect. Because of that, I was able to go and order the new pads. So this is just something that these parts are so inexpensive. It made sense for me just to get them ordered, and I get them replaced now since we're working on the shocks to get those new ones on. It's one of those items where it's probably not worth it to take the shocks off, take them apart to replace those pads because they're not that bad yet. Then maybe they'll get there. But since we're lowering the car, I'm going to have them out anyways because I do take them out to lower it. We're just going to get them taken care of for the client, and he won't have to worry about it. So, I grab my flashlight again. To get the coilovers out, obviously we have these two bolts up here we need to take off. We have our hook connector here since this is a sky hook suspension, so we'll have to disconnect that, and that comes with it. And then we have our lower mounting bolt right up there that we'll need to take out. Pretty simple, and you're not going to wrestle the shock out. I end up unbolting the upper control arm from the car right here. Now I will say that this arm these bushings on the arm will want to twist a little bit, so sometimes you can get a flat of a wrench on there to kind of twist these arms to help get them off the studs, but it's all pretty simple and pretty straightforward. You just zip these nuts out. There's no shims to worry about. It doesn't affect the alignment. We can pop this off, and that's going to free this arm out of the way just enough to get the shock worked out. Sometimes, depending on the car, you might have to pop some fender liners out to get extra access, but those are just held in with some Phillips head screws. They're super simple and straightforward. And up here on the front, really the same thing, right? Just the lower shock mount. We're going to zip off our upper control arm, undo our connector, and we can work the shock out of here and out of the car. So that's what I'm going to work on. I'm going to just spare you guys the boredom. I'm going to work, spend a couple minutes, get the shocks removed, and I'll bring you guys back once all the shocks are out and ready to be disassembled. All right, so you can see that we have all 4 coilovers out of the car, ready to go, and we have our test subject sitting here on the bench. But before we start talking about the coilover, I wanted to bring you guys over, and we're going to start talking about these numbers a little bit. We have our initial numbers that we pulled from the car, so this is our ride heights measuring from the bottom edge of the wheel up to the bottom edge of the fender. And you can see that, again, this car is impressive. It's only a 1 millimeter difference in the front and 2 millimeter difference in the rear, although it is staggered diagonally. Now, when I did my calculation of drop that I went off the lowest numbers, so I went off the 642 up here, so the right front, and the 655 here at the rear. I mentioned that we normally target 20 to 25 millimeters. I was looking at this car and it's sitting pretty high, so I'm going to target the lower end of that spectrum, or meaning more of a drop, so 25 millimeters-ish. So we basically went through and subtracted 25 millimeters from our measurements, and we now have our target ride heights here. So I went off the lowest, so I went off the right front, which is 25 off of the 642 is 617, and then we went off the left rear here, and that's going to be our target ride height that we're looking to achieve with the car. Now, we can't just go and turn our collars down 25 millimeters because it's not linear. The angle and geometry of the coilovers and the suspension versus what effect we're going to have on the car are not even close to the same. So if I can tell you you turn that down 25 millimeters, this car is going to be slammed. We don't want that at all. So we need to find a way to get this adjusted, and we're trying to be as accurate as we can on getting that 25 millimeter drop, which is our target here. Now, I went through and grabbed my notes from back in the day, and unfortunately it's not as populated as well as I wanted to under here for the 430. Most of the stuff that I was doing during my time at the dealership was really the 458s, 488s, F8s, a lot of the newer stuff. Occasionally we would do 430s, but I didn't have as many of them in to get the documentation I needed. So I'll walk you guys through that. You can see I have a simple note here for 430. Front and rear, 11 to 13 turns, depending on the customer's preference, 12 recommended. So that's giving us a starting point, but really what is missing on my notes is how much of a drop the 11 to 13 turns gives us. That's key. That's really what I needed to know. You can look, I should have it up here. Like right here in the California, I have 14 turns equals 21 millimeters at the front. So that's really what I need to know. So whenever I do this, I try, you can see that I didn't do very well at documenting it in the past, but I try to document how many turns I adjust the collars and how much of a drop I ended up getting. And then by doing it frequently enough, you kind of get a catalog or a history of it to where you can take the numbers and divide them and see how much of a drop you're going to get per turn of the sleeve. And that comes into play big time when we're going to correct our ride height. Although on this car, it's so square, we're not really gonna have to chase it that much. So essentially with our notes here is what it's saying is we're going to need to do 11 to 13 turns. Again, since I said I want to hit the lower end of the spectrum, we're probably going to target 13 turns. Lower all 4 of these 13 full turns, drop the car back down and check our ride heights. Now, as for checking our ride heights, these numbers we have right here, again, the bottom of the wheel to the bottom edge of this fender, which it's hard to read. Let's circle back to these measurements I made up here. You can see I made this mark up here at 700 millimeters. I did that intentionally, 700 millimeters. That's an easy number to work off of. This line up here is arbitrary. Once we lower the car, ideally, let's say 25 millimeters, which is our target, we're gonna run our tape measure from the bottom of the wheel. I'm gonna run it up to this mark, and it should be at 675 millimeters. So that's why I picked a nice big easy number like 700 right there. It's an easy spot to measure. It's just a random point that I measured and put the tape there, and all I'm looking for is to get that 25 millimeter drop. Sure, once I get that where I want it to be, I'm gonna come back and measure from the bottom of the wheel to this fender here to make sure that it is equal side to side and I have what I want. But this really speeds up the process, and it takes virtually no extra time to get that number up there. So we have the same thing on the front. It's at, I think, 670. So then we're gonna, obviously look for 25 millimeters lower once we lower the car on those marks. So essentially is what I'm saying is I do all my work and I'm working off of these measurements until I have it where I think it's zoned in and where I want it. And then I just confirm off of the fenders just because of ease of reading our numbers. Now, we have the paint marks on this coilover, the factory paint marks. So we could take this collar, break them loose, run it down 13 turns, upper collar 13 turns. You're going to need to use a spring compressor of your choice to get the pressure off the spring so we can get that collar turned down. I will say that as you get it turned down, it does take the pressure off naturally where it's a lot easier, meaning you can usually make your fine-tuning adjustments with them in the car once you get everything turned down, all your threads cleaned up, everything lubed. So meaning I take the coilovers out, I can break those lock rings free, which is one of the hardest parts. And then once everything's broken free, lubed, and you've already lowered them down so there's not as much spring pressure sitting on them, I usually find that you can make those fine-tuning adjustments while they're on the car. Obviously a lot easier to lower them when they're on the car than it is to tighten them and compress the spring more. But we have a little bit of a caveat here because on this particular application, we don't have your typical nut on the top of the shock, and I need to replace these bottom spring pads. So I'm gonna have to spin everything all the way off the bottom to get that all off. Meaning I cannot just turn my collars down 13 millimeters, come up to the top of the shock, take the top hat off, get everything off, get my spring pad off, and call it good. We're gonna have to do everything down here from the bottom, which is gonna affect our collar height and our ultimate ride height. So here's my plan of attack on how I'm gonna address and work around that issue. I'm gonna break my collars free and I'm gonna bring them down 13 turns. I will then take a set of calipers and I'm going to measure from the bottom of my pad to the end of the shock and get that measurement. I'm going to document that measurement, and then that's going to allow me to pull everything off the shock, get everything replaced, and get everything reinstalled, and that should get me back really close to where I was before the disassembly. This is absolutely an extra step that I need to take only because I'm replacing that bottom spring pad. If your spring pads are good, you don't need to worry about this. Just turn down your collars, get them back in the car, measure your ride heights, get everything fine-tuned. Now, while we're here, let's take a second and talk about the tooling to turn down the collars. It might be tempting to take a screwdriver or a chisel and a hammer and stick it right in our groove and drive it down, but you're really going to mark these up and just destroy them in the process. They're usually pretty tight, and there's better ways. I do have the generic coilover wrenches that I've had for years. Again, They're modified to make them fit better. But I can tell you that with only one tooth on these are cumbersome. They're hard to get on there. It's hard to get them broken free with those because of the force it takes to break them free, and they don't sit on there that great. So I have actually went and since then spent the money on the Hill Engineering pieces, which basically lock in place. It's really worth the money. These are going to get collars loosened and tightened without any marking or tooling marks or damage, which is really what I want. Cost isn't that great. For me, it's easy to justify because I'm doing this pretty frequently, so it was an easy choice. But there's a lot of different ways to get these loose. Take your time, use the right tools, you won't mark them up. So I covered what I need to do for my application to get these turned down. I think it's pretty straightforward since I'm going to be lowering them all basically 13 turns and I'm not making any compensation or adjustment. But that's kind of one of the main things I wanted to talk about on this video, and unfortunately this car doesn't have that issue to really cover it, but let's still talk about it. So let's say, for sake of conversation, that my left rear back here is 15 millimeters higher than any other side of the car. So we already did our measurements. Everything is, the front is dead equal, and I have a 15 millimeter difference side to side. It's on the left rear, and I want to bring the left rear down 15 millimeters more. Now, this kind of comes into where I need better notes, because if I had the notes on the 430 like I did up here for the California, where I have how many turns equals how much of a drop, I can use that math, and then I can say, I need to turn this collar 1 1/4 turns further to get an extra 15 millimeters of drop. That's really what I wanted to cover on this video, is I wanted to have the car be really uneven, and then I can show you, once we get the coilovers off, how we make different adjustments and do the math to get that set height. And then once we get them back on the car, we'll make our fine-tuning adjustments to get it level. But usually that is enough information that you need, where you're just making small changes, maybe a turn, maybe 2 turns, and that really levels the car out. But it would have been tough because I also don't have my information here on how much of a drop 11 to 13 turns makes on a 430. Obviously, we're going to target 13 on this car today, so I'm going to have that information so I can update my sheet. But in a nutshell, that's really the gist of it. So I'm going to work to get my collars moved down 13 turns. I'm going to come back, make my measurement off my reference point so I know what I have, document it, pull everything off, get my spring pads replaced. I'm going to clean the threads up. We'll lubricate the threads, put a little bit of white lithium grease here, so that way everything spins and turns nicely, get these reassembled. And I'm going to spend the time to get this stuff cleaned up and lubed again, so that way if I need to make an adjustment, hopefully I can get away with doing it on the car while we're fine-tuning it, rather than pulling these all the way out again. But it's all pretty straightforward work. Spring compressors to take the pressure off, our tooling here to break the collars loose, spin them off. Just really some time-consuming work, a little bit of measuring, tedious, wash, rinse, repeat 4 times. So I'm going to work to get those turned down. If any surprises or anything unusual pops up, I'll bring you back. If not, I'll see you guys back here in a second, where all of our spring pads will be replaced and all of our spring perches will be turned down 13 turns. All right, what did we end up with? Well, for starters, let's talk about our pads that were on our spring perches. These things were pretty bad. Once I got them off, we can really see just how annihilated they are. Like right up here, you can see that rubber is just giving and cracking. And it's a little unusual of a thing to find on these cars, because a lot of the other rubber on the car is in great shape, but all 4 of these things were just really in rough shape. Like I said, they're still pretty soft and supple here in the center. It's really the parts that were exposed. But since we're here, we're easy enough. I think it was under $100 in parts. Got all those replaced. As I mentioned, I had to spin the collars all the way off from the bottom. My method of measuring the collar height worked just fine. So we got everything reassembled. You can see that I've went and put all 4 of the coilovers back into the car. And you can see here on this one, for starters, here we go. For starters, you can see I have my lower locking perch way down, so it's not in the way at all. Also, you can see some remnants a little bit in there, but I put a little bit of white lithium grease on the rubber to the spring perch. Typically, they do that from the factory. I went ahead and did that now, so that way if I need to make any fine-tuning adjustments with this perch, it's going to slide on the rubber and it really makes things a lot easier. I did use a small, fine, soft wire brush, and I cleaned the threads of the body up and put a little WD-40 on it, so you can see that everything spins quite nicely. Now, as for how far I turned down the collars on the coilovers, like I mentioned, I initially went for that 13 full turns on the coilover, and I measured the distance of perch on them. So I just lowered only the lower perch all the way down 13 turns, left the upper perch in place, measured that gap, and it was nearly 20 millimeters. And I was like, oof, I think that's going to end up lowering the car much more than the 25 I'm targeting. So I actually backed it back to 12 full turns on all four, which ended up giving me 18 millimeters of travel on the thread. So it's essentially 2 millimeters of height difference for one full revolution of one of those threaded collars on the coilover. Now, like we mentioned, that 18 millimeter on the coilover is going to translate to more than 18 millimeters on the suspension travel, just based on the geometry of everything. So we have everything reinstalled back into the car. Everything is cleaned and lubed. They're not locked down. I will say that I have not torqued everything in here. It's tight, our upper control arm, our shock. Our lower bolt, actually, you can see right there, is not tight, just in case I have to take them out again. You can see that I've left the sway bar off. Those won't affect the ride height, but I did that just in case I have to end up pulling this shock back out to make any changes. You can see that our connectors are still here, not connected. So I talked about this a little bit at the beginning. We have now, cleaned the shock body, got some WD-40 on it so everything moves freely. Also, we've lubricated that rubber to our upper pad or collar, and that really is where they get stuck. So even when I was taking them apart initially to get the pads replaced, that's really what's getting stuck in binding. And then once you lubricate it, it's much better. Also, now that we've lowered the car, the spring is able to stand 18 millimeters taller than it was before, meaning it has less pressure it's applying on the pads. I say all this as in, now that we've gone through and done that and they're in the car, we can probably actually go and make fine-tuning adjustments on the ride height without having to completely remove the shocks, put a spring compressor on them, and do all that. That's really the way I go about it. So really, once everything's cleaned and lubed and taken care of and we've lowered the car, you can usually make those fine-tuning adjustments with it in the car. If it doesn't work out that way, no love lost. It's still worth the effort, and I'll just take them back out. Now, I will say it's been a bit of a hot minute since I've lowered a 430, and that's only because really during my time at the dealership, we were seeing a lot more of the 458s, 488s coming in. I'm mentioning this because on those cars, I vividly remember that it is far easier to remove the upper control arms to get the shocks out, but all of those cars are using the MagneRide, not the Skyhook system that these cars use. I say this as I'm pretty confident I could get these shocks in and out without touching the upper control arms. Where I showed you guys where I had the hardware off and the control arms just resting there, that's where I ended up leaving all four of them, and it was absolutely no problem at all getting the shocks out. I felt like I wasn't fighting for space. Maybe moving the control arms that way gave me an inch or two that made it a lot easier. But going at it again, I probably would give it a shot, not loosening the control arms, and see if I can get the shocks out without messing with them. So now that I got all that taken care of, it's time to get the wheels thrown back on the car, get it down on the ground, jounce the suspension, and see where our ride heights turn out at. All right, so it's back on the ground. We worked the suspension, and this is where we ended up. And you can see that it looks the way it should have came from the factory, in my opinion. We're not going for a slammed, lowered look. Really just trying to get that wheel positioned properly in the wheelhouse, in the wheel well. I will say that the right front is the lowest out of all four corners that we did. We'll talk about the exact heights that we got, but we actually made the car worse in terms of leveling than it was beforehand. So we still have some work ahead of us, but looks pretty good. And I've been over here working my numbers, kind of doing some figuring and trying to decide which direction I want to go with the car. I was texting the client. I sent him some pictures. We were kind of having a conversation, so that way, really my goal is to get this dialed in to where he wants it and what is best for him. And it's a compromise because we want it to look good, we want it to look right, but he doesn't want to scrape the car a lot and have a lot of issues that you would have with a lowered car. I will say this car is already equipped with front skid plates, so if he does scrape, he's not going to be damaging the bumper, he's damaging the skid plates, which are sacrificial. Not that big of a deal, but we'll come over to our sheet and you can see that I've been doing a bunch of scribbling and math. And here's what I ended up with after our 12 turns of adjustment. And these are numbers that are based off of the arbitrary numbers I put up here. So it was 700 on the front, 670 on the rear. And so I jotted down my measurements, and here is what we ended up with. So I ended up, for some reason, with 36 millimeters over there on the right front, 29 on the left front, and then 27, 29 on the rear. They're pretty similar, pretty close. So obviously something here, it really came down. So I kind of was just doing some math here because I kind of liked visually where the right front's at with the 36 millimeters. So I was just doing some numbers. If I kept the right front the same and then I wanted to equalize everything to bring it down the same amount, I would have to bring these two sides down 7 millimeters and 9 back here in the left rear. And then is what I did here is I actually ended up taking all 4 of these since I had such a spread on numbers. I added up all 4 of these, got the average, just added all 4 up, divided it, got our average. 30 is our average. Divided that by 12 because that's how many turns I turned down the collars. And that's giving me an average of 2.5 millimeter per turn. So what that's telling me, that's kind of the information I was missing, is to make my adjustments here roughly to 1 full revolution of the collar is going to give me a 2.5 millimeter height difference on the car. Now, I say roughly because keep in mind there's a lot of weight jacking on the car. So if I make a change back here on the left rear, it's going to affect the right front. So I was playing around with how many turns I'd have to make to kind of match that 36 millimeter on the front. And after looking at the car, talking to the client, I mean, 36 millimeters, that's 1.5 inches. That's quite a bit further than I typically go. I really think it looks great when I get up here. So, but I'm getting fixated on the gap. So I think this absolutely looks fantastic. But then when I step back and really pay attention to how close we have the bumper to the ground, I think it's just a hair aggressive. And I rather have this one be just a hair higher than lower. That way, if the customer doesn't encounter a bunch of scraping, I don't want to make it a burden for him to drive the car for ingress and egress out of big dips to be difficult. So I think is what we're going to do is we're going to work to kind of split the gap a little bit. So I was just, again, I end up filling out a whole piece of paper when I'm doing this. But I was kind of thinking I'll bring the right front up 1 turn. So that's going to bring it up 2.5 millimeters theoretically. So we're going to be targeting roughly, actually I think my math is wrong. It's 33.5 on our ride height. And then I did the math of what I'm going to need to do. Oh, here we go. So it's 33.5 if I bring that up 1 turn. If I bring the left front down 1 turn, it's going to put me at roughly 31.5. So then we don't have nearly the gap we have there. And the rears are pretty equal, so I figure we could do 2 turns on the left rear to bring us to 32 and 1 turn on the right rear to bring us to 31.5. And that's going to get us all very close right there. Now, I can tell you from experience that I'm not going to get those exact numbers when we do it, but I think that's going to dial me in a little bit. So I know my rear is sitting higher in the front, and although I love the way it looks, I want to bring that right front up just a little, and then I want to level it. So we're going to make the 1 turn up on the right front, left turn or left front, 1 turn down, and then we're going to do the rear, 2 on the left rear, 1 on the right rear, and then it's the same thing, wash, rinse, repeat, right? We're going to get the car back on the ground, jounce the suspension, repull our measurements, and see what we end up with. I am going to try to do this adjustment with the shocks still in the car, so I'm going to get it back on the lift, which now is going to take a little bit more work since it's lowered, and my lift arms, I already can tell they don't clear underneath the car. It was tight getting them out. Then once I moved the car and jounced the suspension, I know it's settled to where I can't get them under. But I'll work to get the car in the air. I'm going to pull the wheels. I'm going to make the adjustments on the car, get the car back down, jounce the suspension just like we did last time, and then pull my measurements. And I'll bring you guys back, and we're going to find out how much closer we got to dialing this in. Okay, so I made my adjustments to the car. You can see it's back on the ground. I rolled it back and forth, I jounced the suspension, and let's look at our numbers and see what we ended up with. Now, as a reminder, I went 1 turn down on the left front, 2 turns down on the left rear, 1 turn up on the right front, 1 turn down on the right rear. I ended up right here. These are our numbers going off our arbitrary marks, so 640, 637. So we're still a little bit low on the right front, 670 and 671 on the rears. Now, I went and took our baseline numbers right here, which is 700 and 670 on the front, and subtracted the current heights that I have on the car, and here's the drop that we've achieved on the car. So we're at 30 millimeter on the left-hand side, 29 on the rear of the right, and 33 on the front. So we're getting close. It's still that right front that's problematic. I really kind of where we're at with where I looked at the car and talking to the client. Right now, I'm targeting a 30 millimeter drop. I know that's a little bit more than we talked about from the beginning, but this car, It just looks so much better where it's at right here, and I think it's a good compromise from being in the weeds but giving it the right look. So I'm not going to fuss about that 29 on the right rear right now. I'm going to go and see if we can get that right front raised up. So I'm probably going to turn that one more turn up and get the car back on the ground and see what effect that had on all four of our ride heights. All right, I think we got her dialed in, sitting right where we wanted to, and we're essentially averaging a 30 millimeter drop all the way around. Went through, got everything squared up, so each side is within 1 millimeter of the other side, so really spent some time doing it. Really had to bring this side up a bit, but I think that's gonna definitely help with the drivability of the car and managing it and getting out of large dips. And in my opinion, it looks great. It doesn't look lowered. It honestly looks the way it should. And if you guys ever pay attention to the press photos that Ferrari releases of the cars versus how the cars actually come out, in all the press photos, they sit much lower than they do in reality. Definitely a pet peeve of mine because everyone sees those pictures and that's what they think the car is going to be like. And then you get them in reality and they're sitting an inch higher. Just the way it is. But we have her all dialed in. Now, I will say that once I was working it and I got it pretty close to where I wanted off of our arbitrary numbers, I jumped back to actually measuring from our fender well to the bottom of the wheel, because at the end of the day, that's the actual measurement that matters. So this trick that I do up here is really only to help me get it dialed in quicker, because it's just a lot easier to get down there and see when I'm making my measurements. And honestly, through the process that I do, I'm pulling a lot of measurements. I'm really going through this over and over and over again. So it just makes it a bit easier for myself to get that taken care of. But you can see that it's looking great. And I'll bring you guys over to our sheet here. I jumped back up to the top because these are our fender well measurements. Here's where we started, 643. We ended up at 615 on both fronts, 655 and 657 on the rear, and 626 across. So I actually ended up getting that dialed dead nuts on. So I did the math from where we were on these ride heights to these ride heights, and we ended up with 28 millimeter drop, 27, 29, and 31. So that's where I said we averaged it out to a 30 millimeter drop, but we went through the extra work and time to get the car leveled. Kind of a unique situation because this car was actually really level from the start, and then once I did the lowering, it was really messed up, which is good because it goes to show you guys in the video what you can do to correct it. And I mean, it's kind of worth talking about a little bit on this because I definitely spent quite a bit of time lowering this car, really had it on and off the rack quite a bit. I mean, heck, I still need to get it back on the rack, torque everything down, reattach the sway bars, connect my suspension connectors. There's still a lot of work to do. But I say this as in, a lot of people would probably deem this as being unnecessary. They'd say, just get the car in the air, turn down the collars, and call it good. And my point of view on this is if a client's bringing me a car to be worked on and serviced, and they're wanting me, obviously, to do the best that I can do, and knowing that I can spend a little bit extra time, a little bit extra work, and I can get this alignment and the ride height dialed, or I should say get the ride height dialed dead nuts on so the alignment's a lot better, I just can't bring myself to not do that. I feel that I'd be selling myself and the client short. And, you know, I think they're coming or bringing their car to me because they want me to apply my best effort to what I'm doing to the car. So I'm going to apply my best effort, even if that means I'm going to take more time doing it and it's going to take me a little bit longer. Now, I'm sure some people would probably just turn the collars on the coilovers down, not actually measure and level the car out. Who cares? Put a bunch of tooling marks on it. Maybe they get it done a lot quicker. Maybe they don't charge as much. Hey, that's up to each owner's preference. In my opinion, these cars are pretty much at the pinnacle, the top of the automotive food chain, and I feel that the way that they should be maintained and serviced should match that. So that's my own personal opinion and belief, and that kind of gives you a little bit of explanation on why I'm just so willing to go through this process, to spend this much time, to really just fuss over these small details. Frankly, if it was my own personal car, I would fuss over those details, and I have really no separation from when it's a client's car to my car. I fuss over the details. They're important to me. I think they're really what separate the work from one person to the other, and I take a lot of pride in what I do. Hence, you can see my process to align the car. So, like I mentioned, the only thing I have left to do is actually get the car back in the air again, pull the wheels off again, torque all the suspension, connect all the suspension connectors for the shocks, get the sway bars connected. I'll have to hook my tester back up, clear all the errors out because I cycled the key with the shocks unplugged, get the under trays on the car, etc., etc., etc. So honestly, I was actually hoping to get this car lowered today, under trays on it, and have the actual first row test with this conversion done on it today, but I can see that that's not happening. I think my best case to end up at the end of today is just getting this thing reassembled from the lowering of the car, which is fine. But anyways, guys, I hope you found some value in the video. We have the basic numbers of what you can do, or what it takes on turns to lower the car. Is roughly 2.5 millimeters per turn of a collar to get a millimeter of drop out of the car. I can say after making my fine-tuning adjustments, that was about what I was seeing. So if you're going to be lowering your 430, that's calculations you need. You can make your measurements, calculate how many turns you want to go, and go through the process yourself. All right, so we were able to successfully lower this 430, and luckily, as it turns out, they're running you guys through the process of leveling the car out, since it ended up pretty uneven after I lowered it. But nonetheless, that's really what I wanted to highlight and show you guys, is the technique, and just a little bit of time, care, and effort. You can get these cars dialed in real nice. So I need to get this car put back together. I need to get it into the alignment shop to get it aligned, and hopefully soon get it back in the client's hands. So be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to leave your comments below. As always, guys, thanks for your support. Appreciate for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.